Hello, kiddos. I'm gonna be completely and utterly honest with you guys. It's a pretty crazy day today, which is terribly ironic because not a whole lot happens to me on a day-to-day basis. Regardless, I promise a video every Friday, and every Friday a video there will be. So, what am I talking about this Friday? Well, as a lot of you guys probably know, the movie The Fault in Our Stars is out, which is based off of John Green's best-selling book of the same name. And I've been reading through it myself based on the suggestion of a friend, and there are no words for it. That being said, a bit of an ironic epiphany sort of hit me earlier in the week, and it has to deal with the timeless phrase that I know everybody's heard: don't judge a book by its cover. Now, I know that that's ridiculously overused and everything, but there's still truth to it today. It's just I think what makes it ironic now is that things are sort of in the reverse. There's no question about that phrase itself has a specific kind of connotation to it. Think of it like this: when I say don't judge a book by its cover, what's the first thing that pops into your head? People. You think people. You think that the analogy is towards people, and that's very true. It can be towards many things, but the most common of which is towards people and relationships. And the connotation, I'm guessing, if you're like me, is that the person outwardly appearing may not look the most respectable or the most attractive or the most whatever it may be. Something about them turns other people away and sort of makes them social outcasts. Except when you get to know said person, there's a lot about them on the inside that's absolutely amazing. So don't judge a book by its cover. That's what we've all come to know over the years. But I don't think people often think about that in the reverse side of things. That the people who appear to be respectable may not be the most inwardly attractive or easy to know. But that's alright. Those are principles that I think everybody's really got a handle of nowadays. What's really upsetting me is the way that you can apply that to a book. I think my issue really today is more with media, marketing, and the way that creative art is being presented and represented nowadays. For example, back in the day when that phrase was first invented, don't judge a book by its cover, the reason it existed was because the covers of books were terribly bland. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, the complete works of Jules Verne. To be completely honest, they had some of an elegance and a charm all to themselves at that time period. But it wasn't until we started entering into what we would consider the modern age, and when kids were starting to be forced to read these books as a part of literature courses, it became an incredibly dull process for them because, to start with, the book's cover, probably the most ancient things they had seen in their entire lifetime. But then they started to read these books, and they started to understand the author's thought process. And because of that, they were able to learn more about what it was like to live in that time period. Even if the book was set in, say, a predicted future or a distant past, the way the author wrote that gave insight into what was happening in their daily lives. And thus, the phrase was born: don't judge a book by its cover. Nowadays, I don't feel as if books are presented in as honest of a light as they were back in the day. Instead, with commercialism, we're so focused on making this sell that we sometimes lose sight of what may make that book, in particular, important. I guess what I'm trying to say, guys, is that there are a lot more bad books out there now that have great covers. So there's the irony for you. The phrase can still be applied today, but it's kind of been flipped on its head and turned around a bit. Okay, so guys, get this. I had to do a simple little internet search just to see if it wasn't just me feeling this. And I actually found this site called Goodreads.com, which had a list of books that were terrible but had great covers. The list is called Bad Books with Good Covers. Now, I don't completely agree with everything on this list. I think some of these are great books that had great covers. And a good majority of them I've never even heard of, and some I have, but I've never read. But regardless, I think everybody recognizes the first book on this list. Number 1 is City of Bones, which comes from the Mortal Instruments series. It's the first book in the series. Now, I remember passing by this book numerous times inside the library or inside bookstores, and yeah, it had a really nice, catchy cover. Never had the time to read it. I had some friends who did and said it was awesome, and some friends who read it and said it was completely terrible. And one thing I know for sure, even though I haven't read this book myself, they made a movie based off of it, and the movie bombed. Pretty bad. Now, that doesn't always mean that the book was terrible. I mean, there's been a huge number of book-to-movie adaptations that have just failed completely. But I think it speaks in great volumes when a large majority of the population can generally agree on the same thing, that this book had a great cover, but wasn't the best on the inside. And in fact, I find it really interesting too when I think about it. All the best top sellers have some of the most simple covers. Greatest example of this that I can think of right now is The Hunger Games, and Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. In fact, the covers of all 3 books by Suzanne Collins even have their own metaphorical and symbolic importance if you know the stories. And even if you've seen the movies only, you can pretty much guess what each of those symbols means. That's fantastic cover design. It's just enough to get the reader interested, but it's not like they're trying to force an entire scene or emotion upon the reader before they even open the book. A person who really wants to read your book because of the contents inside will read the prologue or the first chapter, and if you don't have them hooked by then, they're not going to keep reading your book. Or they will, and write a terribly colorful review on it later. And who knows, you probably have the best cover in the world. So where do I start this? I guess that brings me back to The Fault in Our Stars. Take a look at that cover. It is completely and utterly simplistic, clean, clinical, a little depressing, but very subtle, and ultimately benign. It's a lot of adjectives for something that's generally just one color. But then you open the book up and you read it, and it's not even remotely close to what you expected it to be. And by the end of it, you feel different for having read it. That's a good book. That's a good cover. So don't judge a book by its cover. As always, guys, life is a play, and the play is the thing. I'll see you next week.
Stafeezy, and don't forget that you can subscribe.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So we did a bit of this, we did a bit of that, saw a few characters. Oh, my absolute favorite characters are the ones who will improvise with you.